I'm joined on the set now by International Affairs Editor Armen Georgian. Armen, how significant is this?
Well, it would be a huge shift if it actually happens. I mean, during the whole of the Cold War, there was this so-called Nordic balance where Finland and Sweden were pro-Western, cooperated with the various militaries of NATO, but were not actually in the alliance. So that balance has clearly ended now. NATO officials have pointed out that Sweden and Finland are already very compatible with NATO structures and operations. And from NATO's point of view, Swedish and Finnish membership would create a sort of integrated northern flank that already includes Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. But I suppose an important question is, does admitting more members stretch NATO? One can see the argument that NATO thinks this will put more pressure on Russia, but does NATO also, in a sense, put pressure on itself by admitting new members? You have to bear in mind, Monty, that NATO has, by its own standards, been underinvesting in its own defense capabilities. NATO members are supposed to spend 2% of their GDP on defense, but it's estimated now that only 8 out of 30 NATO countries actually do that. By the way, if you look at the figures for 2020, Finland and Sweden were not spending 2% of their GDP on defense either. So with all that in mind, what does this mean in practical terms? If the two countries were to join, would NATO have the resources to put new battle groups on what would be a much larger border and a very tense border, it has to be said, with Russia? So there's some big questions surrounding NATO's resources there, I think.
Well, Vladimir Putin has warned of consequences if this were to go forward. How is Russia responding?
We've got some more responses this morning from President Putin's spokesperson, who says this would not make our continent more stable and secure. Dmitry Peskov adding, this cannot fail to arouse our regret and is a reason for corresponding symmetrical responses on our side. He didn't specify exactly what those responses were, but we have a clue from what other Russian officials and MPs from the Duma have said in recent weeks about likely nuclear deployments, so there would no longer be a nuclear-free Baltic Sea, as it were. There have been warnings about that, and almost certainly a further militarization of the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad and of the Kola Peninsula. So certainly we could expect to see more tensions in the Baltics, which are already, reasonably high. But of course, Russia has a lot of troops tied up in Ukraine. So land defense by Russia on the Finnish border is obviously would be a rather thought to be a tricky thing to do.
Okay, International Affairs Editor Armen Georgian. Armen, thanks as always.